Hello, everybody. You see, we have about 21 online so far. We're going to be starting up here in a moment. We're getting folks situated here live, so Chris will be out here shortly. So if you just stand by, we'll be with you soon. All right, folks online, we're going to go ahead and get cranked up. We've got our people seated here in the audience. And so I'll introduce Chris Webb. He's Vice President of Transpac Managers. And he's going to be talking about how much do you know about lost and whole? Right. So some people know more than others. I think Jonathan's an expert on lost and whole.
Right.
So, there you go, Chris.
All right. Thank you very much. It's great seeing everybody out here this afternoon. The first thing we're going to talk about, and one second, is the elephant in the room. So lost and whole, we also often referred to as LIH. So a lot of times in this slide or in this presentation, I'll talk about LIH, which I'm talking about lost and whole. It's always the elephant in the room before a drilling program begins. Everyone talks about the money going to be saved in this next. So everybody gets together. We're having a meeting about the upcoming drilling program. We're excited. We're going to bring in new technology. We're going to drill faster. We're going to, save money. But what never gets talked about is what happens if something goes wrong. That's the discussion that doesn't happen. So the cost of managing LIH risk is usually not planned for and comes up at the last minute, leaving companies with no time to find solutions to reduce their exposure. So we know this for a fact because we're the guys they call the last minute. Oftentimes rigs are on standby, waiting for an insurance policy to get put in place. They're waiting to even put the tools down hole. So everybody's out at the site and they're sitting there waiting for this to happen. Or a contractor, directional contractor calls us and we need coverage in 2 hours because they're about to pick up the tools. So obviously when things like this happen, and they happen frequently, that means that this risk is not being planned for adequately. So data is the key. And at Transpac, we've been insuring wells since 1991. So we've insured thousands of wells since this time. We've paid hundreds of claims on downhole tools. On a daily basis, we talk to directional drilling contractors, we talk to company men, engineers, insurance agents. This is all that we do every day. All Transpac mainly focuses on downhole tool losses, downhole tool insurance, and this is what we talk about, the risk and exposure to these companies. So we have used this data that we've collected to develop a proprietary underwriting engine that we have developed. We're the only ones that have something like this. And we use this to evaluate downhole tool risk. Each well we look at is run through our engine to determine if the well design is a financial liability and the design and financial liability make an acceptable risk to insure. So we only want wells that have a possibility of a loss and not a probability. That's kind of our motto. So it's always possible we'll have a loss, and those are fine, but we don't want the ones that have the probability of having a loss. Okay, so most of you know what the risk is, but we'll just cover it really briefly. What is the risk for a downhole tool? The risk is that a drilling or logging tool might become stuck or lost or damaged while downhole. This risk is excluded in any standard commercial policy, like your SEAT commercial general liability excludes downhole. Your operator's extra expense or control a well will exclude tools that just become stuck downhole. So this exposure is left for either the contractor or the operator to fulfill. So what is the main loss we're talking about here? What is the main reason for loss? And it's mechanical sticking. Now this can be broken down to a couple different categories, but this is generally mechanical sticking is where the well packs off around the drill string and it can no longer be retrieved out of the hole. The biggest issue that we're seeing right now is hole cleaning. New tools, new technology drill fast. Everybody wants to go fast to cut off days in their drilling program, but as you drill fast, you're going to produce more cuttings. So you have to also adapt the flow rate of your well and your hole cleaning. So if these items aren't changed to handle the new increased performance of these tools, you're just going to put a bunch of debris in the well, and as you come out of the well, you're going to become stuck. Another challenge is mud systems. So it's typical when we see drilling in a new area, it's pretty obvious that you have to get the mud system right. A lot of times you're experimenting with mud systems when you go into new areas, so you can see why that might be an issue. But also in existing formations, operators are looking to cut costs again. And maybe where they typically always use a oil-based mud, now there's like, well, we could save quite a bit of money if we can do this with a water-based system. So they'll change their mud systems. They'll practice doing different techniques. And a lot of times they pay for this cost-cutting measure by getting their tools stuck. A lost in hole event could be extremely expensive for those involved. If you can't get unstuck, you've not only lost the tools, you have to pay for fishing cost, you have to pay for the time that's spent drilling, you have to pay for any sidetrack operation that's going to take place. So while the cost, time, the costs and time that are associated with a stuck event you can't recover those costs. There's no insurance product. There's no way to recover those costs, but you will, with a product, you could insure the tools and at least get back the value of the tools. That's one cost you could recover in a stuck hole event. So now that we've gone over kind of the general information, let's talk about some of our claim data. We thought this might be interesting. So for this presentation, we took our last 15 claims. Now, the last 15 claims take us about within the past 2 years, okay? I excluded any wireline and any coil tubing claim out of this. So these 15 claims are strictly drilling tools. And what we always look for when we go and analyze our claims is we're looking for trends, something that's common that's happening that we can go back and check for on the next wells that are coming in. You obviously can't do anything about the wells that you just had, but you can, going forward, look for trends and patterns, right? So we look at things such as location, time of year, hole section and depth, BHAs, and cause of loss. And as we expected, you cannot put your finger just on one item. It's very difficult. You really have to get down to maybe it's a combination of 2 or 3 items to find. So all losses come in many forms and fashions. And when we review the drilling logs after the loss has already occurred, a lot of times, many of these issues we find could have been prevented with better practices. All right, so the first thing we'll look at is our loss locations. So these are the loss locations for these 15 wells. As you can see, they're spread out all over the world. So loss and hole risk don't just pertain to one certain area. You don't just say, oh, well, this one area in Texas, that's where all the losses occur. The losses are common throughout the world. Anywhere where there's drilling happening, a loss can occur downhole. So just to put some perspective on this, we had 5 of the losses were in Texas, 2 in Oklahoma, 1 in Colorado, 1 Louisiana, 1 Pennsylvania, 2 were in Alberta, 1 in Queensland, Australia, and 1 in Trinidad. And of the wells that we insured during this time, I would say about 70% were in the US, about 20% were in Canada, and about 10% in the rest of the world. So really, if you take those percentages and look at the locations, it's pretty common. It fits pretty much in line that these losses were spread out pretty evenly throughout the wells that we insured in the different areas. The next thing that we look at is the time of year. Yes, sir.
Did you guys refer into what part of Texas? Like, there are certain fields in Texas, or random?
They were pretty random around Texas, but we do see on every application we get in, we always ask about loss history. And so we can see the fields, and we could probably go offline and talk more. So for the presentation, I just kind of dove one layer deep. We obviously take this data and go much deeper with it. But yes, all over Texas are happening. West Texas, there are a lot of tool losses in West Texas. South Texas, Eagle Ford, a lot of tool losses. So those guys are having lots of tool losses in those areas, but they're also drilling a lot of wells. So is it a direct correlation? Is it, you have to look at how many wells are being drilled as to how many losses to really get a true feel. But yes, they're losing them in those 2 areas quite frequently. The next one, and maybe somebody can help us with this one, because the time of year is one of the most perplexing pieces of information that we have not been able to identify an issue. It's the time of year most stuck tool claims occur. So we've noticed this for 15 years that we've been talking about this. And it is the time frame on here. I put September, October. Those 2 months account for 40% of our claims. Which, why? We don't know. And really, even if you break it down a little deeper, it's the last week of August to the first week of October. So in that time period accounts for over 40% of the claims that we have each year. And we think, oh, that was just an anomaly that year. And then the next year, same thing. So I don't know if it's heat, if there's fatigue out on the drill sites, if they're going on vacation at that time, and the drilling team is changing up and you got different people out on the rigs, or kids are going back to school. I don't know. So it'd be really interesting, and maybe somebody could comment in if they have any insight into what that might be causing that. But that is, or maybe it's just an anomaly that happens every year. Okay, the next thing we'll look at is a whole section and depths. So we frequently hear from clients, they only want to cover the lateral section of the well. That's the only place that there's any risk. We hear that all the time. But when we go back and we look at all our risk, so you can see right here, we had 1 loss in the vertical section, 4 losses in the build, and 10 in the lateral section. So based on this data, over 30% of wells actually had losses in the build, the vertical section, right? And the funny thing is that nobody thinks that they can lose tools in the build section. I don't know why, but that's what everybody comes back to. Oh, we just want to insure the very end of the well. Well, that obviously, 1, that's not right. And 2, nobody's going to give you coverage if you only want to insure the very end with the most expensive tools for the fewest amount of days. So you have to look at your whole well as you have to look at the risk of the whole well. And if you look at it that way, then you'll be able to get some products to help you reduce your risk. But if you're just looking to get help on the very end of a well, there's not many people that are going to help just do the very end of a well. So you have to look at the whole well, the risk of the whole well. So the data here proves what we tell everyone, when the tools go downhole, and in many areas, based on the conditions, the build can actually be even riskier than the lateral section for stuck tools. Just think West Texas, right, in the Permian. There's a lot of depleted zones on the way down. And several operators have had a lot of trouble getting through some of these zones on the way down because they're depleted, the pressures are different. You're trying to go through different zones, different formations, different pressures, you're hitting water. So as you're building your angle through these zones, that can be a lot of risk and a lot of issues, not just in the lateral section. The next thing that people typically think is that only the very end of the well is dangerous or risky. So what we've seen is that our typical well is between 10,000 to 20,000 total measured depth. That's a typical well that we see, right? You're going to go 10,000 feet down, you're going to go 10,000 feet horizontal. That's North Dakota, West Texas, Eagle Ford. That's kind of the range that you're looking at right there. So the data shows that most losses are occurring between 5 to 15,000 feet. So obviously there's not going to be losses from 0 to 5,000 feet. Very rare. If something went really bad, we do have losses there, but it's usually definitely very preventable from 0 to 5,000 feet. Something went really wrong. So we're not as worried about that. But then you also notice that between 15 and 20,000 feet, there weren't nearly as many losses either. So the very end of the well, maybe it's not as risky as we thought, but it's the middle section of the well where we're having, over 60% of our losses. Between 5, I would even say it's probably between 8 and 15,000 feet. So next we'll look at the BHA type. So basically I categorize our BHAs into conventional BHAs and rotary steerable RSS BHAs. In the losses, conventional BHAs were actually in 10 of the claims. Rotary steerables were used in 5 of the claims. And I would say when we look at conventional BHAs, the average replacement cost was about $500,000. When you look at rotary steerables, the average replacement cost is $1 million plus. We've seen rotary steerables up to $3 million. So that's a huge exposure for anybody downhole at one time. So my quick note here on the rotary steerables, that even though that the rotary steerables were only in a third of the claims, they accounted for well over half of the premium paid out because of the value of the rotary steerables. So next, let's talk about historically over the last 30 years. So Transpac has been insuring tools since 1991. So in that time, we have seen mechanical sticking account for about 50% of the claims. So if you were to take from 1991 to now, about 50% of the time, it was mechanical sticking. Then you had a lot of differential sticking, tool failures, fires, just general errors. So now we're seeing a concerning trend moving to almost, so now in this current trend, I'm talking about the 15 claims that we've been discussing. Almost 90% of the claims are a result of mechanical sticking. So most of these can be contributed to operators trying to drill fast. And at the same time, they're trying to cut costs. So by using less casing and cheaper mud. So let's just think 10 years ago, a typical well was probably 15,000 feet total measured depth. We would case that well all the way through the curve, either up to or all the way through the curve. So you're talking, you probably have about 8,000 feet of casing. And then they're gonna probably generally use oil-based mud, okay? So that's a very safe well, but also very expensive for the operator to add all that casing and to use the more expensive mud. Then slowly they move from a lot more away from the oil-based mud to the water-based mud. So the losses, mechanical losses start to increase. And now slowly the casing now is being set, a lot of them are only setting surface casing. So we're going maybe surface to a very minor amount of intermediate. So we're going like 3,000 feet of casing. The well has now extended to 20,000 feet. So that is leaving you with a 17,000 feet of open hole that you're trying to drill in. So you're drilling faster, you've cut back on your casing, you've cut back on your mud program. That is why the tools are sticking. So basically now it's a risk versus reward for operators. You may save money on most wells, but you're gonna lose a lot more tools. All right, which brings us to how much are you willing to gamble? That's the main question that has to be answered for anybody drilling a well. So how much of your AFE are you willing to gamble? So we estimate based on the value of these tools and everything that goes along with fishing, everything that goes along with sidetracking, that a stuck hole event can cost a company, it can increase their AFE unexpectedly between 5 to 15% for a stuck hole event. And I would say that's probably a low end amount. It could probably get much worse. If you tried to spend a week fishing, that cost could increase greatly. So as a contractor, you know, if you're losing business because your tools cannot be replaced in time for the next job. So a lot of the contractors, you know, they have a certain amount of tools in inventory. And if the operators are losing a lot of their tools, they may not have a tool to go and start their next job. Even if you have jobs lined up, if you don't have tools to bring in, especially if you're trying to use rotary steerable tools, you know, there's probably a lot of conventional tools on the sideline, but I bet there's not a lot of rotary steerable tools just sitting around in people's yards. They're all being utilized. And if you're losing those tools and you can't get any more inventory, then you're losing jobs and you're losing money. Yes, sir. Okay. All right, we have a question online, so. Okay, next time I get a question from the audience, let me know because I'll need to repeat it because I can't hear online. So we'll come back to that. So if you're actively drilling, it is not a case as if you will lose your tools, but when you will lose them. Current trends are showing that 1 in 30 horizontal wells are losing tools downhole. Those are our trends that we're seeing. And it was funny because just getting ready for this, we got an application in. It was a large operator with a 200 well program. This is going to be last year's program. because they're giving us their loss history. And they had lost 8 BHAs. Now, I don't know if they're conventional rotary steerable, but if we think they're rotary steerable and we say 8 and they average $1 million, they just lost $8 million of tools downhole last year. And so I said they lost 8 in 200 wells, approximately 200 wells. So we see 1 in 30 horizontal wells as it claims. That would be 1 in 25 wells. So I was like, wow, just kind of backed up our data, right? Because I don't know exactly every operator. And, you know, every field is going to be different. And basically how I drill and how I design my well is going to be different. So if I'm putting casing all the way through the curve and using oil-based mud and drilling a very safe, conservative program, obviously my number is going to be much higher. But if I'm going surface casing, water-based mud, I'm just going to try and do it all with the rotary steerable. You're probably going to fall in 1 in 30 or worse. So you can start to plan for that.
Hey, Chris.
Yes, sir. Do you have another one?
Well,
No, that's a.
but what I was curious about is, do the service contractors contact you for loss rates in a given area? In other words, they're asking you for information,
Right.
as well as service. Does that happen very often?
Okay, so the question is, do service contractors contact Transpac to find out about loss rate numbers in a given area or where they're drilling?
Or for a given operator?
For a given operator? And they do not. So Transpac is, we have to be very protective of the data that we get in, right? Because everybody that sends us their wells, it is their, you know, that is their drilling design, their drilling program. They don't want people to know about their losses, and they don't want people to know about their drilling design. This is kind of like I said, it's the elephant in the room. It's hidden. Everybody wants to talk about the records that they're breaking. If you on LinkedIn, everybody's breaking records all over the place, right? And never once have I seen a LinkedIn article about, I lost my tool. So
That's the third one.
yeah. So Transpac, we protect any information that's sent to us. We protect that with extreme confidentiality. So no, we wouldn't. I could talk about in general what I'm seeing in that area, but I would never release exact numbers. But yeah, if somebody were to call and say, hey, you know, how are rotary steerables doing in South Tech in Eagle Ford? And I would say, well, I can't tell you exactly, but I can say I've received 10 applications and everybody had already lost a tool at one point, a rotary steerable tool. So our biggest customer is somebody who just had a loss. So usually that's what we can see is people that have already had losses. And, you know, if you never had a loss, you're like, well, why would I need any type of insurance or a risk product? But when you had a loss, you know you need it. All right, let me. Okay, so this kind of goes to who needs to worry about loss in hole, right? So if I build a tool, I probably don't need to worry about loss in hole unless I'm renting it out or it's an experiment. So the main people that need to worry about loss in hole risk are the operators and the service contractor, directional drilling contractors. For the operators, I would say it's mainly going to be your small to mid-size operators who need to focus on their loss and hole risk. The big guys, they just drill and drill and they can handle losses. They have the money built in and everything. But if you're on a less than 30 well drilling program, this probably would be something that you would definitely need to analyze your risk. But if you are a big company and maybe you're going to branch off into a new area, that may be something that you look at. If you're going into a new country, if you're going into Colombia, you know, maybe you want to look at it, ensuring those risks in that area in particular. Another one is if you have investors. So a lot of the small companies, they bring in a bunch of investors and they're going to go drill 5 wells. Well, if you have a stuck hole event and you use your $1 million rotary steerable tool and you lost it, you're going to have to go back to those investors and ask them for another $1 million because you have to get another tool. But if you had gone and already handled that risk, that loss in hole risk ahead of time, then you would already have that accounted for. And then you wouldn't have to go with the investors because either you would have reduced the contractual liability or had an insurance product to help you out. Another thing for the operators to think about is to develop a strategy at the beginning. Don't wait till the end after you have your tools and they're already on the way to the well site. You know, first of all, it's going to be really hard to get any type of coverage in place. And second, it's going to be really expensive because you're doing it at the last minute, which makes everybody suspicious. Whenever you drill, you want to ensure you're one well off in the last minute. You're not going to get the best pricing. But if you can plan for it ahead of time, you can work with your service contractors. You can work with your insurance company. You can probably, you have your safe driver discount. Well, you can get your safe driller discount, right? If a company knows that you're going to do all your business with them and you can spread that risk out, then it's a lot cheaper than if they know you're just bringing them a one-off well. If I see a one-off well, I'm assuming you're bringing me your hardest well in. And so I have to charge accordingly. But from a contractor standpoint, so if I'm a directional drilling contractor, now, why would I be interested in loss and haul? Well, first of all, it's your tool that gets lost. Now, sure, you have a contract that says the operator is liable for that tool, but what if that contractor can't pay for it or operator can't pay for it? What if during the stuck hole event, everybody's pointing fingers at each other, blaming each other for the loss? Never happens, right? That operator now, they kind of have the advantage, right, over the contractor because they have your money that you need to buy a new tool. You could go to court and it could be years before you can get that money. But in the meantime, as a contractor, you're losing out because you can't replace that tool or it has to come out of your pocket to replace that tool. But if in the background you had some type of insurance product covering your replacement cost of your tool, then you can buy that tool and you're going to get paid in a timely manner because it's with the insurance company. And at the same time, you don't have to sour your relationship with the operator. You guys can just agree to disagree and move on to the next well. In 30 days, you're going to get your money and you can go ahead and buy your tool accordingly. You don't lose out on any work and you don't lose an operator in a business relationship. Another thing for a contractor is now that we're moving in, hopefully everything's going to be picking up. So a lot of the guys who maybe aren't working right now, they're looking to start a new company. They're going to start their own directional contracting company, right? So you can't take the risk of a tool when you're a brand new company. You need to go out and make sure that tool, maybe your big directional company you came from was able to do it. But as a small company, you need to make sure that you have that risk addressed, whether it be from an insurance or you have a lot of extra money in savings, but you need a plan for it and have a plan if you're a new company coming up. Lastly, from a contractor, it's a competitive advantage, I would say. So you're able to offer typically a contractor offers their LIH, a contractor LIH, which is reducing the contractual liability with the operator. So they'll say, hey, operator, this is $1 million tool. I'll reduce your contractual liability by 50% for so much a day. The contractor or the operator is still left with half of the liability, but the contractor has this LIH that they're offering. Well, what if you were to offer your LIH as a 50% and then maybe another option of a insurance product as well? So now you can go to your operator and you can offer him a you can basically take away all his exposure and offer him this different options. Now the operator doesn't have to take it. And it doesn't cost the contractor anything because everything is a pass-through cost for the contractor. But now he's offering his client different options where maybe his competitor won't. So just something to think about. So let's kind of look, what are my options to reduce this risk? Obviously, I can always self-insure, right? If you've got the money, it's in your best interest to self-insure. But most companies don't have the pocketbooks to self-insure. So then I have two options. One, the contractors will typically offer me a LIH, which is basically, it is not insurance, but it is reducing your contractual liability. So at the time that you sign a contract, you check this box and they'll say, by signing this box and paying this much a day, you will now only be liable for this amount. And that's what your contract will say. But it typically only covers about 50% of this, of the value of the tools. And some tools it doesn't cover at all. An insurance product, you can cover 100% of the value of the tools, but there is always a limit of insurance that you can get. So obviously if there's a $3 million rotary steerable, you're not going to be able to get insurance coverage for that much. So at some point there is exposure. With an insurance product, there's usually a deductible. And in our case, I put 10% because that's what our deductible is. So that's how much you'd still be on the handle for. How does pricing? They both use a day rate. So you're both getting charged a day rate for every day that tool is downhole. And that day rate is agreed upon at the beginning. And the day rate is based on the value of the tool that you're either buying LIH for or buying insurance for. Another thing that is important is fishing requirements. So with the loss and hole contract, that's not a loss and hole contract is done by each contractor. They each have their own versions. So in a lot of the loss and hole contracts I've seen, you have to make 3 attempts. If you don't make 3 attempts, then the loss and hole does not apply. But that can be different for every contractor. So that is not a given thing. That's just something common that I see. So you need to make sure you read and understand what is in there for the fishing attempts. I can only talk to our program, but the insurance is you have to make an attempt to retrieve the tools. So you can't just walk away from tools if they get stuck in the ground, right? You can't just take your oldest tool, stick it in the ground and walk away and go collect your insurance. You have to make some attempts to get that tool out of the ground, an attempt to get it out of the ground. How about damaged tools? This is something that's not, everybody talks about lost tools, but tools get damaged all the time, but they're able to be recovered. So if the tool comes up to the top, but it's damaged, you know, a $500,000 tool can still have $300,000 of damage. So typically a loss and hole contract will not cover damage, the ones that I've seen. With an insurance product, you would be covered for damages. So this is kind of, the second one is covered tools from multiple carriers. That kind of applies to an operator. So an operator may come in at the site, he may have a bit from one company, he may bring in directional tools from another company, and he may have wireline tools from a third company and drill pipe he may own. So with loss and hole, you can only get loss and hole for the tools that that contractor is providing you. But for an insurance product, you can get insurance for all the tools, no matter who the provider is. And also one of the differences is that with an insurance product that you can cover your own tools if you have your own tools. Maybe you have a bunch of drill pipe, maybe you bought your own motors, whatever. You can, any tool that you own, you can cover with an insurance product.
So all the damage tools, when you say covered, you still have to pay that for that?
So the question is, on damaged tools, do you have to pay a 10% deductible on the insurance product? And yes. So if you were insuring a $600,000 tool, that tool came up to the surface. It was not stuck. It was never lost, but it was damaged, and the damages come out to $300,000. So it would be a 10% deductible on the amount of the claim. So your deductible would be $30,000. So your claim payment would be $270,000 in that instance. All right. So just so we can kind of get this picture, the big picture here, I'm going to give you kind of an example. So we have ABC Exploration. They're contracting with top-notch directional drilling, and they have to run their new rotary steerable tool in. And ABC Exploration would be contractually liable for $1 million. So what are the options for ABC Exploration or for the directional contractor in this situation? So the first option is in green right here, and it's where they will self-insure. So obviously it's the cheapest one. They don't have to pay anything, but you can see their exposure on the left-hand side is $1 million. So they're taking everything on their own. The second option with the green and the, I guess we'll call it orange. So the orange is your loss and hole. So in this case, they're taking the contractor's LIH for 50%, The contractor LIH on day rates is typically a cheaper day rate than an insurance product would be. But you can see that in green, the operator still has $500,000 of exposure. Now, the third one, we have the tall red column and the short green column. This would be if the operator chose to take just an insurance product. Now, the insurance product is going to be a little more expensive on their day rate than the loss and whole, but it can cover up to this. In this case, it's covering up to $1 million. We tack in the 10% deductible. So the self-insure would be $100,000, right? The 10% deductible, and the insurance would cover $900,000. And the third one, this is probably what we're seeing become the most popular choice, and I call it the hybrid approach. In this case, operators are able to reduce, or contractors, because a contractor can offer the same option to the operator. So this can either be taken by an operator or offered by a contractor. And in this case, you have the least amount of exposure for the operator still. And in this case, it would only be $50,000. You're taking the contractual liability from the LIH contract and they're reducing it down. So they got the $500,000. Then they're buying insurance for the remaining $500,000. So the insurance is cheaper because they're not taking insurance on $1 million. They're only taking insurance on $500,000, right? So you're getting the best of both worlds. You're reducing down your day rate, your insurance cost, and at the same time, limiting your exposure. And then the operator, they can play around with this amount too, because you have that remaining $500,000 exposure, but you don't have to take all $500,000 from the insurance company. So if you feel comfortable with self-insuring $200,000, then you only take $300,000. So you have to find that limit where you're willing to take the risk and how much you want to cover your exposure. And you can move those numbers around as much as you want to kind of get the day rates and the costs associated with covering your risk, you know, where you feel comfortable and so you have to kind of weigh them both and get it where you're happy. But you're able to do that whenever you combine all of these different strategies. All right. So we're almost at the end. So what do we need to do for before we pick up the tools? So we have a little checklist here. Make sure that your contract is clear. You know exactly what tools you're getting and exactly the value of the tool that you're liable for. And a lot of times last minute, we change the tools or we change the makeup of the BHA. This document needs to be changed and modified because this, if anything happens in a lost tool event, this is your safety net because this is what was agreed upon. And so make sure this stays up to date throughout the drilling process. Another important question is, how do I reinstate coverage after a loss? So this is important to know because you have the drilling rig there, all your different service companies are there. So if you get stuck, you're going to want to sidetrack right away because everybody's out there. So how does loss and whole liability, how does your insurance product, how do they handle to reinstate coverage on a well? Make sure you know that ahead of time so you don't get surprised whenever you have a stuck event and you start asking the questions after the loss occurs. Also, how is the insurance deductibles applied? So that was a great question. Like, how does a deductible handle damage tools? How is it going to handle in this scenario? So just throw out different scenarios to whoever's offering this. They should be able to answer these questions clearly and give you a clear understanding. And if they can't, I'd be a little worried. So these are important questions and somebody should be able to clearly answer these questions for you. How are insurance deductibles applied? Oh, that's what we talked about. How is exposure to tool loss addressed? So, you know, is this going to be on replacement costs? Is it depreciated tool value? Does it cover damaged tools? Is it full liability, partial liability? Is it, you know, these are the things that need to be asked. And finally, one of the most important is what are the fishing requirements? Because you don't want to, you think that you're covered, you think you've done your homework and come to find out you didn't meet the fishing requirements. So the coverage is either denied one way or the other. So make sure you understand ahead of time, what are their fishing requirements? We've seen some contracts where they required 3 attempts and that an attempt only counted if they were able to latch onto the tool. Well, in a lot of scenarios, that's going to be very difficult to do. If you're in the lateral section of the well and it's packed off all around and the tool broke off, getting back down to that tool is going to be a big challenge. And if you can't latch onto it, I mean, you still have stuck tools. You know, that would be really, really difficult to explain to your bosses if that coverage was denied for that case. So make sure you know that ahead of time and have checked on that. So the question is, how many BHAs would we cover for losses in one well? And I can only answer this from Transpac's perspective, obviously. So we have been burned on this because typically if there is a formation issue below the ground, sidetracking 100 foot away from it, there's no guarantee that you haven't compromised everything down below that well. So a lot of times Transpac, if it is a whole issue, we would not cover a sidetrack, but it is on a well by well basis, and we'll talk with everybody. We get the engineers, everybody involved, and we discuss it. Now, if it's just a tool failure, just a motor went out and, you know, failed, then you just get a new motor, you put it in, you go back down, it's no big deal. But when it's whole issues, it becomes different because nobody is really certain exactly what just happened down there and what it looks like down there. So it can be difficult to get coverage reinstated sometimes. Good question. So takeaways from today, downhole tool losses happen frequently and they can happen anywhere in the well. So don't think that just because it's not at the very end of a well or you're not drilling a 20,000 foot well that you don't have risk. There's always risk. And our losses show that. Make a plan to mitigate your downhole risk. Operators should budget in the cost to your AFE. So this is an amazing thing that nobody budgets in the cost of insurance, right? It's a last minute thing. And so nobody can, it hits everybody's pocketbook at the end as an unaccounted for expense and they don't want to pay. They'd rather take the risk. But if you were able to plan out your risk and plan your strategy at the beginning, all these costs would be built in and they wouldn't hit the pocketbook or blow the AFE at the very end of the budget. So thirdly, a little plug for Transpac is that, you know, hey, this is what we do every day. We just talk to guys about loss and hole risk. It's all we do. And so if anybody ever has questions or just want to talk about ideas or areas or trouble, you know, we'd be happy to give Mike or myself a call. And, you know, we just sit around by the phone waiting for somebody to come and call and talk to us about it. And, you know, we're not high pressure salesmen or anything, because at the end of the day, you know, you just have to weigh the cost of protecting your tools versus, you know, the risk of losing them. And so that every company is different. Every company has a different risk strategy, and you just have to weigh that option with your company and make the right decision for your company. So that concludes our presentation. So guys, if you have any comments or questions, we'll take them now. I think we'll take one online first. Okay, so we have, do any operators or contractors ask you, oh, that's one we kind of talked about, ask for advice on avoiding loss and hole. So when we get wells in, we get their designs in, right? And so we will have conversations. We have our own engineers that review well plans, and we're not here to tell people how to drill wells, but we are here to tell them, if you did this, then we would be able to cover it. Or if you just reduce this risk a little bit, then we would cover it. So we're not telling them you have to do this, but you know, we do give suggestions on better ways, safer ways to drill the well. They know how they want to drill it. They're the experts, but we can give advice on how to drill the well a little safer and maybe drill the well in a way that an insurance program would cover that well. So, you know, basically you can say, well, I want to drill this well. And they're like, well, that sounds great, but we can't cover that well. But if you did want coverage, just make these little tweaks and then we would cover that well. Third question, can a service company cover third-party tools which they are using in their service for an operator? So that's a good question. So say you're a directional drilling contractor and I think Schlumberger now is renting out their high-end tools, right? So maybe I don't have that capability of that tool, but one of my clients wants that capability of a tool that one of these big service companies has. So I have to then rent that tool. So now I am on, as a directional drilling contractor, now it's kind of flipped because now I am contractually liable for that tool if it gets lost. And so, yes, you can, to buy downhole tool coverage, you either have to own the tool or be contractually liable for the tool. And if any scenario that comes into play, whether you're renting tools, own tools, or renting out your own tools, then you can be eligible for a downhole tool insurance product. Another question, is Transpac a MGA where you act as a broker or agent on behalf of an insurer? So yes, Transpac is an MGA. So we work directly with directional drilling contractors. We work directly with operators, and we also work directly with insurance companies, like insurance agents. So however it is that you need or you feel comfortable, you can call us up and we work 24/7. So we don't work 24/7, but we're available 24/7. We bind coverage on wells on Saturday, on Christmas Eve, on New Year's Eve, Thanksgiving. So whenever they're drilling wells, we're available to put coverage in place because the drilling doesn't stop. You know, these guys are out drilling all the time. So we have to be there available and ready to put coverage in whenever they need. Yes, sir.
In case there is a dispute, very seriously, no, what you do in that case?
So he is asking, what do we do in a dispute? A dispute, give me an example, a dispute between who? Because that will change how I answer the question.
I'm talking about for example, the damage of the tool.
Okay.
How much is damage? How is the value of that?
Okay.
You say as an operator is this, you say as an insurer is this one.
Okay.
Cannot agree.
Okay, so he's asking if there's a claim and they have an insurance product and how do we determine the value of the tool, the replacement cost of the tool if it's damaged? So how do we come to an agreement on that? And so basically what happens whenever you get your insurance product, you're going to say that my tool is worth a certain amount. So maybe my tool is worth $500,000. And then you're going to, if that tool is lost and you come to Transpac and say, I want $600,000, we're going to say, well, we can pay you $500,000 because that's what we agreed to in the contract. So whatever you agree to in the contract, that's why I said it's very important to have that number exactly correct. Because that is the maximum amount that you can't come to us and say, oh, well, I only insured a motor for $500,000, but it's really $800,000. Well, that's why it's very important to have that number correct in there. Now, in the case of damage, if you come to us and say, well, this tool is damaged for $300,000, well, how do you know that? How do you go and get that tool? How do you find that value? You're going to go to the service company. They're going to take it to their guys. They're going to tear down the tool, and then they're going to come back to you with the bill for $300,000. And so as long as that's not more than what you insured your tool for, then you have a receipt showing Transpac, this is how much to fix my tool, and it's not more than what I insured my tool for. So Transpac will pay whatever that receipt. I mean, you can't just make up a number, but if you have a receipt, which the service contractors will go, they'll tear the tool down, they'll come back and tell you how much you're liable for. Yep. Yes, sir. Okay. Right. So he's asking what is needed to get an insurance product set up. And what we have from Transpac, we have an application. This application is going to ask questions about the well. So we want to know about the design of the well. We want to know about the casing, the location, the loss history. So, your standard questions about a well. And then we'd like to see a well schematic with the well. And we're starting to find out that there are some combination of tools that might make a BHA riskier than another. So we're starting to ask for the BHA design, so we can see what tools actually make up that BHA. Because we usually get a list of tools that you want to insure, but those list of tools don't necessarily include you don't have to insure every tool. You pick and choose what tools you want to insure on that BHA. So sometimes we don't get a clear picture of the entire BHA string and how it's made up. So did that answer the question?
You're not insuring BHA, you're letting them select which tool they want to cover your own,
That's right. So,
and then you're giving them a premium for that specific set.
right. So you do not have to insure all your tools, and you do not have to insure the entire value of your tools. So what you're going to do is you're going to list out the tools that you want covered and the value that you want covered. And then your day rate is based on that total value of that BHA. So you can have multiple BHAs in the whole, and they can carry different rates. Like maybe your build section, the BHA is 600,000. So it will carry a day rate. And then you're putting a rotary steerable in for the lateral or $1 million. So the $600,000 tool is going to have a smaller day rate because it's a lower value than your rotary steerable, which is $1 million, will have a higher day rate. And you're only charged at day rate for the days the tools are in the hole. So if you were to pull the BHA one out of the hole, you're going to run some casing, you trip. So you're not in the hole for a couple of days while casing sets, then you go back in. So then you're only charged while those tools are in the hole. Let's see, I think we got another question online here. Nope, we don't. All right, does anybody else online or in the house have any more questions? Or did anybody figure out the reason that the claims are only in August or September and October? Anybody have a theory? School goes back is the winner. Yeah. So I have people that raise their hand. What does that mean? They can't talk, right? Oh, there's more. Okay, thank you. Oh, wow, we have more questions. Okay. Another one, do you work with other insurance brokers? And yes, the question would be that. So if an operator or a contractor would prefer, they do all their insurance through a insurance broker, and they would prefer to have their insurance broker deal with Transpac, that happens all the time. We work with insurance brokers all over the world, and happy to do it. We have lots of good relationships with insurance brokers. Next question is, how do you account for lost and whole of a BHA due to a well control incident? Okay, how do you account for a loss and whole of a BHA due to a well control incident? Unable to latch on the fish. So, huh? Oh, are they saying, do you think they're saying that there's a control of well policy in place? Okay, so what we think they're saying here is that there is a control of well policy in place. And the only way a control of well policy is activated is if there's a blowout. So now we had a blowout and these tools were in the hole, and they are now become blown out of the hole, I guess, and completely damaged or whatever the case may be. So in that case, we would be the excess over the control of well policy. So we would be so the control of well policy would pay first, and then Transpac would pay second. Next question, what is the percentage of insurance requests from other parts of the world compared with USA? USA. I used to work at USA, so that's with USA. Percentage of insurance requests, like what the requests, what would you say? I would say probably only 10 to 20%, maybe 10 to 20% of the requests we get are from other parts of the world. And that would include South America, Europe, Australia. I wouldn't include Canada in there because Canada kind of stands alone, as they generate send in a lot of requests. But anybody outside of the US and Canada would account for about 10 to 15% of our requests for coverage. Okay. Oh, yes. Okay, I'll do this one real quick. Explain how wireline tool insurance works. So we can cover any tool that goes downhole below the surface to do logging or drilling activity, right? We just can't, I was talking, we can't cover anything that goes below and stays permanently. So we wouldn't cover casing or pumps because they're not in the hole temporarily. But wireline logging tools we can cover, and that's a pretty popular request that we're getting lately. Wireline logging tools can cost well over $1 million. Open hole logging is generally what we'll see. And, you know, you'll get your triple combo logs, $1.5 million. And you can ask people about wireline, how many tools have been lost. And generally, not as many wirelines get lost, but they get damaged. They're more fragile than a drilling tool. And damage is the main issue there with your wireline logging tools. And the main difference between how we cover, the coverage is exactly the same for wireline and drilling tools. The only difference is how we charge. So drilling tools are down for several days. So we charge a day rate. Wireline is down for usually less than 24 hours. So we charge a run rate. All right. Okay.
I was curious, you mentioned that you make recommendations based on, you make these changes to your billing program with that insurance.
Right.
Do operators take that advice usually? Is that they say, oh yeah, it's not good, or
Right.
percentage adjustment or not?
We'll adjust. Okay. So the question was, when we give it, when a operator sends in a well and we look at that well, and then we offer that operator advice back on some changes that they could make if they wanted to get our insurance. How often are they receptive of that advice? And I would say it all depends if they're existing clients or, you know, if they're coming with a one-off well, I would say usually they don't really take our advice. But if they're existing clients and they know us, and it comes down to, like, as they're drilling a program, right? We like to see they're drilling and the first well is 15,000 feet total measured depth. And then they come back and we're like, hey, you know, you're right on the edge of what we want to cover. And then the next well comes back at 15,500, right? And then maybe the next well comes back at 16,000. So we're like, all right, look, this is as far as we're going to insure. If you guys want to go farther, we can't do it. And then they're like, okay, we'll go back and we'll just stick with the 16. So they kind of push the boundaries as far out as they can to still get coverage. And so that's generally where we'll see it. If it's somebody coming in off that we don't know, they don't usually take, because they think they know what they want to do. And they're just going to be like, well, this is how we designed it. This is what we want to do it. We'll just take the risk. So I would say it's more on, if we already have the relationship with us, they know who we are. They know we're doing what's best for everybody, trying to anyway. And so they're much more receptive. Yes, sir.
Just a financial curiosity.
Uh-huh.
You may have answered because it is related to if your company is set only to sign contracts that we never will lose money. You never will lose money. It means whatever happens, the operator or contractor or whoever
Right.
will be the one. You always win.
That-
That is the question.
That-
Your contracts.
So,
Are you always earning money? It means you never lose money.
so the question was, does the insurance company ever lose money? Or in the contract, do we always make it to lose money? And so always about beginning of August, we were doing pretty good. And then all of a sudden comes the 2 months we just talked about, and there goes all our profit centers. So no, we pay out about, I would say roughly I'd say about 10 claims a year. Okay. And so you can do the math. I can't tell you how much we pay out in claims, but we pay out about 10 claims a year. And the difficulty with downhole tool losses is, if you think about auto losses, you know, 75% of auto losses are probably under $3,000 to $5,000 that you have to pay out, right? So an auto insurance policy can be really affordable. Most people still think it's not affordable because it's insurance, right? Nobody thinks that insurance is affordable. And they're like, well, if I just if I just saved all that money, then I would be saving the same amount, right? But just nobody wants to save the money, so they just buy the insurance. For a downhole tool insurance product, a loss is complete. So we do have some damaged tools, but I would say 80% of the time, you've lost the entire tool. So you may go 20 wells and never lose a tool, and you think, wow, I'm paying so much in insurance. And boom, in one instance, you've just flipped the scales, and now you have just gotten a check for 600,000, but you only pay premium of 300,000, right? So that is a difficulty with downhole tool insurance, and that's why there are very few players in the downhole tool insurance world. We're one of the only companies that do it. There have been many companies that have come and only lasted 1 or 2 years, but Transpac has been here for 30 years, and it's because we underwrite it and we have that proprietary engine. And our goal is to make a profit, but we also we have repeating customers over and over again because we provide excellent service and we pay our claims fast and we pay our claims well. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it is not just, we do pay a lot of claims. So it's not, we don't just bring money in. We also pay out a lot of claims. Thank you. Yes, sir.
So this goes back to what he brought up earlier about this on damaged tools or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So does your company, are you guys educated enough as far as when you're assessing the well plan, because it's complex BHA going down the hole, it has my fitting tools, it has my stuff in there that's going down the hole. You know, we have our own operational requirements, check, shock and vibe, all these kind of things, right? You guys assess what these components are and what the manufacturer's limitations are as you go to insurance this design, this well design?
So, okay, so the question is, sorry, I have to rephrase it for the online. Do we look at the design that is provided by the contractor or the operator when they've gone through and they've had their engineers design up this well and this BHA? And do we go and look specifically at the specs and the design of that well? Do we have the competence to look at that? Is kind of what you're asking, right? As not just got two guys who do insurance, right? So yes and no. I'm never going to tell you I know more than you do. I'm never going to tell you I know how to drill your well better than you do. We have our own engineers in-house that we do use who look at wells all over the world, but they don't know your exact drilling program. They don't know exactly what you're doing. But what we do know is we know the risk, right? We have a certain, everybody can drill the well they want to, but there's a certain risk tolerance that Transpac is willing to insure up to, right? It doesn't mean, just because I don't insure your well, doesn't mean you can't drill a successful well like that. All it means is that I think the probability is higher that you might have a loss the way that you're drilling your well. But never does, you know, a guy be like, well, I've drilled 20 like this and never had a loss, right? Well, maybe you have, but from our knowledge and our experience, we would just say, no, we're not going to say you're wrong, you know, but we might just say, you know, this is higher risk than what we want to take on, and we're not going to insure that well. Does that kind of, I don't know if that kind of answers.
My curiosity is where I have with my clients,
yeah,
our clients, the biggest conversations about payment and things like that is because some tools come back out of the hole and they're damaged or they've been run even after we said this is the limitation of the tool here, max temperature and all these things, but they run them anyway, knowing that they might exceed those protocols. And so we have ways of knowing. I mean, our tools are so I'm just curious when you're assessing your customer's well plan and tools, when you say, hey, you guys are exceeding certain limitations of this tool A, tool B, tool C, you might reconsider that before you go down the hole.
Right. So he's asking, there are a lot of clients out there who, and we also see this, who want to run the tools out of spec and higher than they're designed to go. And I think kind of out of the question, are you saying, would we cover a tool that was run out of spec? And the question is we don't, if we decide that we're going to improve that well and you followed your drilling program, we don't go in and look at, was this tool run out of spec or not? So yeah, we would pay that. Well, when we reviewed that, we may not insure that operator again, which is typically what happened. I mean, we hear a lot of operators brag that they run those tools intentionally 120% over the spec, right? They test the limits of these tools. That's not exactly, we're not looking to insure wells that are the record breakers, right? I don't want record break. I want the normal well of a drilling program so we can, you know, spread our risk out. And yeah, we may get burned once here or there, but we learn which operators drill that way and which ones don't. And yeah, that's, we're trying to identify, but as you know, it's very hard because you give them the tool. I mean, you're insuring it, so you can't say no just because they ran it, you know, you're not going to win that battle. But temperature would be maybe a different idea. If they said the temperature was this, and then they ran it 100 degrees over that, that may be a little bit different story, but just running it over the spec of running the motor too hard or something like that, no, we wouldn't. Yeah, next question.
You guys insure drill pipe,
So the question is, do we insure drill pipe? Yes, we insure drill pipe.
wear and tear and damage?
No wear and tear. Yeah. So, but we would insure, you know, if the drill string dropped to the bottom, you know, became an accordion, that's just normal. Unfortunately, it's not normal drilling operation, right? But it is in the act of a normal drilling operation that happened. So yes, if you had scheduled your drill pipe, you know, if you had said, I want 100, and a lot of times you're not going to lose all of your drill pipe, right? So you may have $300,000 of drill pipe downhole, but really you don't need to cover about 100,000 of it, say. And so you could do that because typically, you know, you're only going to lose the bottom 10 strands of drill pipe or something like that, I'd say. So yeah, that is an option. Yes.
You know, a while back, the car insurance companies with the little deal in the car to see how you drove.
Yeah. Oh,
And I'll consider to take it out when you can, and actually provide that with the PHAs if you're insured on a long scheduled program, so they insure times that they would be PHAs are actually run, you know, within moderation and they're not run over.
right. Yeah. So he's asking, no, I haven't thought of that. So it's kind of, he's asking kind of on the safe driver idea where they put the thing in your car to make sure you're not driving at a high rate of speed. So I don't know if they're, yeah, hard braking. Yeah, they check all that. So you're saying that there is a tool out there? Okay. So would we consider putting a tool on that monitored how hard these tools are run? And if you proved that you ran your tool in a safe environment at a safe rate, would you be eligible for a discount like you are on the safe driver discount? And I would say that would definitely be something that we would look at. That's what we want. I mean, that's what if you come to get an insurance product with a one-off well, you're going to be looked at a little closely at first. And then as you insure more and more wells and you're doing it safely, you're able to insure a higher limit and your day rates are going down. So we kind of do that, but if you had a tool that could actually measure that, that would be pretty cool. So that's a pretty neat idea. Oh, yep.
Contractor, you don't want to put restrictions, might put you in a bad spot. So if you're monitoring your client and they think on your day work contract, we only have $50,000 worth of responsible for, but you're going to put in another factor in there, and that puts you in a bad spot of being a policeman. And I wouldn't want to, we want to help you, not put you in even hot or water. In other words, you come in and say, oh, no, you don't have coverage. Well, you've got a day work contract saying you don't need liable for $50,000 or $5,000. So he's going to go, well, this is what I'm liable for. So that's like, we had the provision for fishing attempt has to be made. So that helps the contractor instead of putting a burden on it. So it would be the same way with each. If we could work away with that, but what we don't want to do is put you on the spot of all of a sudden you're having to be the policeman and tell them they don't have insurance because they exceeded it, and they're going, well, I'm not paying you the money for it because I have my contract. So, now, it's something we can work with and all, but what we don't want to do is be putting you guys as a contractor in the back pocket any worse than he already is. So can you describe when you say making an attempt to fish?
Okay.
What does that mean?
Let me answer it up here because the people online can't hear anything. So the question is, what does it mean to make an attempt to fish? We saw that in the chart that's in so basically the idea behind that is that our contractors wanted the ability to make sure that the operators attempted to fish. And so we left it kind of general like that. So the contractors could make their own rules, right? They could say 2 times, 3 times. So basically from our insurance product, you have to make an attempt to fish. And could that be jarring on the well? Could it be trying to get down to the well with a fishing company? Yes, all those things. So generally what happens when there's a stuck tool and they're fishing, they'll, whoever the insured is will call us up and say, hey, this is what we're doing. Does this meet the requirement, right? So we're in communication the whole time that a loss event's so we're making sure that, yeah, that you've met that requirement and they're like, okay, good. Because that's the first thing I want to know is, am I meeting my requirement? Because I don't want to be denied a claim. And so it's really typically in the US and everybody makes an attempt. There's so much monetary value they've already invested in that well. They're not going to just leave a tool down there. So we don't usually have to even worry about that because somebody's going to make an attempt to go out and get that tool because usually they have a good well and they could just mess up the whole well if they don't get that tool out. So they're going to make an attempt to get down there and get it. So we have a question. Oh, people say vacation is the reason. So online and vacation is now winning. So a question, does every whole section have to be covered? No. So we don't typically from our perspective require that you insure the vertical section of a well because there's not much risk there. If you were to insure a strictly vertical well, maybe you're going really deep, just vertical, then yeah, you can insure you can insure your vertical section of your well. We just don't require it. But we do require that the build and the lateral section of a well be insured. We do get a lot of requests. Can we just insure the lateral section? And there may be some reasons why we do that. So that's just a conversation you have to have with us. But our general philosophy is that you need to insure the build and the lateral section of a well. But as with anything, if you ever have a question, call us and talk to us about it, and we'll see if there's a reason to change. Who does your underwriting? Yeah, we are the underwriters and we have engineers. So we don't really release who the engineers are because we don't want everybody going out and harassing them and trying to challenge them on why they deny or accept a claim. So we kind of keep that part confidential. But Mike and I do a lot of the underwriting. We vet everything that comes through. And we also have an engine that we have all this data in. So we run through a bunch of our different rules. And so that is how our underwriting is handled. So it's kind of a 3-part. We have a true engineer. We have an underwriting engine that evaluates it based on the data that we've learned. And then you have Mike and I, which eyeball everything and look for the something's not right here type thing. Let's see, what else? Oh, did I go back to the top? Yeah.
So do your models, do they take into consideration like downhole pressures, like rock properties, anything like that? Because casing programs have a lot to do with porosity, right?
Right.
So, like, do you guys drill that deep, or is it just more risk averse for what you know that you've had in the past?
Right. So the question is, how deep does our underwriting engine go? Does it look at very technical things like the porosity of the rock? as opposed to casing and can I get there without this casing and that type of thing. And I would say at this time, it does not go quite that technical. It is technical as far as we are evaluating wells that were successful in these areas using this casing program, this design. You know, in this area, what has fluid product. So we will look at flow rate. If we're going to look at your mud weight, we're going to look at the type of mud that you're using, things of that nature. Probably not as technical as, you know, some of these software programs that are going to go in and really analyze it. But there's also other properties that we're looking at that those things don't analyze from a financial and from a area to area type thing. So yeah, we're not quite that technical yet. But
I've got another question. So let's say you mentioned that you guys cover a well, and you'll cover this well design, and you approve it. You say, yeah, this is approved. We're going to cover you for the curb and lateral.
okay.
At what point of deviation from that plan that actually happens do you decide we can no longer cover this project?
Okay.
Do you
Yeah, I see.
understand what I'm saying?
So the question is that whenever we approve a well design and the operator continues to drill, now are you talking on that specific, he's asking what deviation away from that drilling design will we not cover the well?
Yeah. For instance,
Right.
like you can plan to get 10 degrees to
Right.
100 in your curve, and then we're going to drill it 90 degrees throughout
Right.
the lateral to TD, and you guys approve that. But then the operator gets behind, or the
Right.
rig gets behind, and all of a sudden they have 24-degree dog legs in the curve, and they land, and then they drill the well out. At what point do you go back and say, well, you deviated from the plan that we approved,
Right.
and that well plan that you actually drilled is nothing like what we approved?
So
So
he
we're not
yeah.
gonna- we're not
I
gonna
see what you're
pay
saying.
the claim. You see what I'm saying? It's
He's
something
saying
that-
like how much deviation would be accepted by off of the original design before a claim was denied. And that is a tricky question. Obviously, I can't tell you an exact amount, but we don't deny. There are your normal drilling changes that happen on a well. Whenever that tool's downhole, you do not know exactly where you're going to land, right? But if you told me you were going to drill a 5,000-foot lateral and you drilled a 10,000-foot lateral, you obviously changed the design of that program. If you were a 5,000 foot and you ended up at 5,500, you know, that's small. You know, we're not here to deny a claim. We're not, we wouldn't be in business for 30 years if we denied every claim that came in. So for instance, ones that we are mainly people who on the application don't tell us the truth of what they're drilling. So if you were to only insure up to 2,000 feet, but so you had a 6 3/4 assembly and you're drilling to 2,000 feet. I'm just throwing out numbers, right? Not going to make sense. And then you came to us and said, hey, I have a 5-inch tool here. And I was at 6,000 feet and I want you to cover that claim. Well, we had no idea. That's not what the well looked like when we approved it, right? Yeah. And that's not even the tool that you had scheduled. So we're looking for major things like that before a claim would be denied. Or the one that we get is, yeah, what day do tools go down hole? Oh, they go down hole on January 14th. Okay, we'll insure it. And then they get the loss in, and Ashley is the one who adjusts our claims in the back. And, you know, if the claim comes in, oh, yeah, the tools were down hole on January 1st, you're like, wait a second. You know, obviously, so though it's very obvious things that a claim, not just your typical drilling of a well. You have no idea exactly if you're going to be exactly at this point or this point. So the claim would never be denied for something like that.
You have an application that maybe in the pre-planning phase, so right before the PHA goes forward, wherever you expect that operator or that supplier to provide a serialized list of components that are now going to the PHA.
Right.
That prior to going below rotary.
Right. That's right. So he's asking, do we require an exact schedule of tools that are going to go downhole in the well. And yes, now we don't require every serial number, but we need to know that it's very important that you have the tool. It's going to be the mud motor and it costs 250,000, and it's going to be an MWD that costs 500,000. So I am now covered for 750,000 if it goes downhole. So now when a loss does occur on the well, all we do is we take what you scheduled on the application and compare it to the drilling logs of what you had, right? And it's going to show, yep, motor, yep, check, check. They were both lost downhole, and he's scheduled for this much. If he comes back in, so 750,000, if he comes back and says, I want $1 million, we're going to say, no, you only scheduled 750,000. But yeah, it becomes very simple. It's very non-invasive. Nobody goes out to the site and checks it. And it's a simple form that you fill out, and you can see in the drilling logs everything that went downhole, and so that's how it's done on a claim. Let's see, I'm probably losing track of. Are there more questions coming in over here? I don't. Oh man. Yeah. Let's see.
What do you do if you're on sidetrack 3 and they go to insure DHA and they tell you that they already lost information?
Okay, so the question is, on the application, well, that would be a miss. Okay, so the question was, if they were doing sidetrack number 3 and on the application, they didn't indicate that they had lost tools on the previous sidetrack. And we specifically asked, is this a sidetrack? Yes. Did you lose any tools? And if you answer no, and then we say, have there been any hole issues? And if you answer no, I mean, we specifically asked that question for that very reason, because nobody will provide that information if you don't ask. Nobody's going to give that information up like, yeah, I just lost tools and now I want insurance. So that would be much more difficult. You wouldn't get in. If you'd already lost tools on a well, on that well, you will not get insurance for that well. You may get insurance for your next new well, but we do not cover any well that has had a loss on it existing, for that very reason that you have no idea. Usually if there's an issue down in that well, there's an issue. And yeah, a lot of times people, maybe they didn't land where they wanted to in a lateral, so they're going to sidetrack to hit a new formation, or they don't like the formation in producing the way. So we cover sidetracks all the time, or they drilled a pilot hole and then they're going to sidetrack off the pilot hole. Yeah. So we do cover sidetracks, but not after. We do intentionally ask, was there a loss in that sidetrack? And in that case, we would not cover. Yes.
Asking by curiosity.
Yeah.
Maybe the drilling engineers will help, because you don't have to know. You know something about what happened when come the investigation inside in the operator to find the root cause of something that happened in the and they find there the person everywhere is responsible. What happened there inside in the process administratively, for example, fail the engineer or somebody in the operator, etc. How does it work there?
So
we're talking about no punishment, nothing.
Right. So he's asking, what is the process for how to find out what happened in a well from the engineer? And he's talking more from the operator in the engineering perspective. How do they determine why that tool was stuck in the hole? And that's a question he's asking. From accountability, like, okay, because they do need to figure that out, because they're going to go, usually an operator has a plan. They have a drilling program and they're going to move to the next one. And that's the problem a lot of times we see, is that they'll have a loss on a well. And before they have been able to figure out why they had the loss on well number 1, they're already drilling well number 2. And guess what? They drilled well number 2, just like well number 1, and boom, loss on well number 2. We see that it hurts. We get that not often, but we do get that. And we'll get 2 losses right in a row. And it's just because that exact reason they haven't stopped, because the drilling program doesn't stop. They haven't stopped to take the accountability to look and figure out what's going on. And then by the second one, they're like, oh, we need to switch our mud properties to this. And then they'll drill the next 20 wells and not have any problems because they figured it out. But before, if you're still in the process before they figure it out, you're still susceptible to the same problem. So that does occur a lot. That's a good question.
There's a question on there about temperature and who pays the deductible over here.
Okay, they want to talk for, let's see. I keep going to the top, don't I?
Yeah, you have to scroll down. It might be taking.
I need somebody to, okay, I'll start at unfortunately, do you have a program where we can insure the whole pad, sort out like a blanket coverage concept instead of individual wells? Not exactly. So we're engineering based. So it is a requirement that we look at each individual well. However, we have made it simple with our application for this exact reason, where I'm going to drill a pad, right? So I maybe have 6 wells. I'm just going to slide the pad, just slide over. Or really, if I'm in a pad and I'm just going to drill 1 well with 6 laterals, we do have that. And you can insure that on one application, right? You just, because they're all exactly the same. Now, if you're in a field and you are going to insure a 6 well program, every well is exactly the same. I got the same tools, same companies out there, everything. On one application, you just list all those wells. You submit one application, get all the wells approved at one time. So we still have to technically look at each well, but you get them all approved on one well at one time. So it's a lot less paperwork for those people sending it in. So Lloyd's of London is not part of the underwriting process. So Lloyd's of London is the paper. They're the money, right? Lloyd's of London is our backer, right? But we are the cover holders and we are the underwriters for the program. Lloyd's has given us the PIN. We've been with them for over 14 years. And so we are proven to them and we're the cover holders. So they have given us the PIN to do all the underwriting on this program. Let's see. Should we receive the recorded session? Will we receive a recorded session?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So what is the percentage of insurance requests? We did that one. This thing is jumping all around. I'm not sure. Okay. Is a deposit required to insure a well? Depends. If you're a brand new client, yes, we would require a deposit up front. If you're a contractor with us, since you will not be collecting money, the contractor, the day rate is a pass-through cost to the operator. And since they haven't collected the money yet there, we do not require a deposit from the contractor. For an operator, if you're just drilling 1 or 2 wells, yes, we'll require a deposit. If you're on a large program, then we will not require a deposit. And what we do is at the end of the well, we have an audit report. And that audit report basically says, all right, BHA 1, give us the calendar days that tool's downhole. BHA 2 gives the calendar days. Then we just add up the days. And then that's how we come up with the premium that's owed on a well. So it's pretty simple.
Do you have a mechanism to cover loss of production from a loss of whole event?
He said, do we have a mechanism to cover loss of production from a loss of whole event? No. And I don't know of anything that will. Yeah, unfortunately. What happens? Yeah, it's the same. Another question we also get is, is fishing costs covered, right? A lot of people want costs, and no, there is no products out there that cover fishing costs either. So. He said there were some, but they went out of business because they covered fishing. So.
I don't think you've done the temperature one.
Okay. Do you see it on there?
Yeah, it's right there. What happens when the operator runs out of?
Oh, okay.
Or-
Okay.
Yeah, you did kind of cover that.
So if he runs out of his spec, there's not much we can do at that time. If he runs the tools out of specs, there's not much I can do for that claim, right? You have to pay it. He did basically what he said. Temperature is a little bit different because there is a clause in there that says if you run it knowingly in extreme heat. So there could be something there, but it'd have to be, very intentional or misleading for temperature. We've never had one, so I don't really know exactly how it would work because it's never been a problem. But maybe with this new geothermal, it could be more of a issue if we start getting some geothermal stuff. So yeah, so we'll see. That business, you said that business is getting really hot.
Kind of like,
Ta-da-cha. What would be, I don't know that term.
You want to see the data that
No,
You don't really get involved with looking at.
no, he's asking, do we get the, would you say ERD? EDR data? No. So that's basically the data that's being recorded as they drill. Yeah. So basically the most that we, up front, we get the design and the BHA and our application, right? And then after the well, if there was a loss, and sometimes to get the audit, we'll ask for the drilling logs, but that's the most that we get.
So you guys don't really get deep into root cause analysis. You kind of keep yourself like, hey, that's for you in the that's for the contractor, that's for the operator. Y'all figure that out. We'll just pay the claim because everything looks
right. The only way we dig deep, we get the insurance dig deep into the drilling logs and see exactly what happened and could this have been preventable. But it's done for our benefit, way on the backside. It's not done at real time. It's done to improve our models, but not at real time to help the operator out. Yeah, exactly. All right. Help me out here. Let's see if. When they raise their hand. All right. Any other thing? Yes, sir.
The question, $1 million that will make you happy. To what you attribute to your company to have been 30 years in business, in this risky business?
In this risky business.
Yeah.
So, well, my father is Mike, and he's back here, and he's the one he started this. He's been doing this since 1991. He's the he said, and he's the pioneer of downhole tool insurance, right? So, well, I think I get to hear his stories all the time, so I'll just repeat his story kind of, but I'll say the short version because if he does it, we'll be here for a lot longer. So basically, originally, downhole tool insurance was included in control of well policies, and they just threw it in there, and they didn't charge for it. And then also, because control of well blowouts make the news, but they're very rare, right? Well, they didn't realize 1 in 30 wells were going to have a downhole tool insurance, so they thought they were just throwing this and it's nice, and then boom, all of a sudden they're getting, 2 or 3 control well and 30 downhole tool claims, right? So it became a bad word in London. And once you become a bad word and it spreads, the market just closes. Nobody wants to touch it. And so Mike came in and he was, different people. And he finally brought it to London and nobody really wanted to talk to him. And then finally one guy listened to him and he said, well, what are you going to do different? And he says, well, I'm going to underwrite it. I'm going to have an engineer review it and underwrite it. And through that process, I mean, it sounds pretty basic, but that was the idea. And through that process, we've been doing that over and over. We have customers that have been with 6 different companies and they still come to us each year. I mean, we've been around that long. It's mainly word of mouth now. So our competitors, one, they don't have the knowledge for this market. They don't have the built up amount of companies that we have developed relationships with. And so it's very hard for them to enter and they don't really have the expertise. The only thing they can come in and do is just cut the price. And we don't drive Ferraris, right? We keep it very moderate and our rate just above. So we try and make a profit for them, but we're not making huge profit. And so the only thing that other companies can come and do is undercut the cost and they'll cut ours in half. Well, we know we barely survive with the rates that we're charging. So if they come in and cut it in half, we know it's just a matter of time. And then they offer huge limits. So we're protective of the limit. You have to be protective of the limits. You don't want the guy that just comes in, and wants his $2 million. You don't offer him a $2 million for a client you don't know, because you don't know if he's drilling over the specs. Probably he's not going to be drilling if he wants, all of a sudden he's been drilling 20 wells and now he wants insurance. You got to be a little weary of why he wants insurance all of a sudden. So there's a lot of that. So that's kind of the keys of why we've been successful, and we provide service. We're here all the time and we talk about it to everybody. So I think that's another key factor that you can't overlook is the service that we provide. And the people on our team have been with us our core team has been together for at least 14 years. So a lot of knowledge. Huh? Yes, exactly.
Again, congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for coming out. I really appreciate it. Lots of good questions. And thank you, everybody online.
All right, so we'll go offline. Good job, Chris.
Okay,
Thanks. I'm gonna stop the share and we'll go ahead and thanks everybody for joining us online, and we'll keep schedule. We have another thing on Thursday, so sign up for that as well. So take care.
Man, you guys are good. I like all the questions.